And I think a lot of it has to do with I've been one of the few that have stood up to the far right extremism.
And because of that, Republican Representative Stephanie Mickelsen believes she's had a pretty big target on her back the last several years. We've talked about this before, when Representative Mickelsen was censured and then told she could no longer run as a Republican by her local legislative GOP committee. That leadership has since been replaced. But last week, we learned how big that target actually is. Daniel Walters of Investigate West dropped a story of how far-right Republican activists have tried to weaponize a federal agency against those who don't agree with the new administration's approach to immigration enforcement. Specifically, how a ranking member of the Ada County Republican Central Committee targeted Representative Mickelsen with threats of raids by ICE. Well, that raid happened back in January. Mickelsen, who owns several food production and seed potato companies in southeastern Idaho, says immigration enforcement isn't really her biggest concern about this. It's more about the culture of politics these days and how intimidation tactics like this could impact anyone's effect as a legislator.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me.
For many people,
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
The second inauguration of Donald Trump
Solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
Was a turning point.
faithfully execute.
For Idaho Representative Stephanie Mickelsen,
They showed up at our business, days later.
that point came later that week.
He started targeting me on Tuesday, and they were there by Friday.
Representative Mickelsen is referring to a January 21st social media post by Ada County GOP Vice Chairman Ryan Spoon, in which he asked the Deputy Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement if he could please send some illegal immigration raids to the businesses owned by Idaho State Representative Stephanie Mickelsen. She's been bragging about how many illegals her businesses employ. Representative Mickelsen says,
So I was actually home that Friday.
It was an off day during the early legislative session when ICE showed up at one of her eastern Idaho farms.
And then when they couldn't get a hold of me, then they start texting 911, Mom, which means I have to call.
Not coincidence?
I don't think it was coincidence, but, could have been, but I doubt it.
Yeah. They keep pointing to something you said during last session, though.
So what it was is we were having a discussion, and it was a Texas Force style bill, which was already tied up in the courts.
This right here is another key component to us protecting and defending the people of Idaho, and that is protecting the very borders of our state.
So on this particular case, and I feel like this has been happening a lot lately, is we target a certain ethnicity or a certain group, and we want to demonize them.
For debate on motion, Labor 32.
It was during the House debate on last session's immigration enforcement bill.
I think you need to remember that every food processor, probably in the state, from the large food processors to the small ones.
But I stood up and I said, I think we need to be really thoughtful before we're passing some of these bills, because I think they have unintended consequences.
So if you guys think that you haven't been touched by an illegal immigrant's hands in some way, through either your traveling or your food, you're kidding yourselves.
So because of that, then they claimed that I had admitted to something which I had never admitted to.
Which is likely what Spoon referenced on January 23rd of this year, calling Mickelsen a, quote, plantation mistress, and said, we're going to take your farm slaves away. However, Spoon told Investigate West, quote, her own testimony drew attention to herself.
And the fallacy in all this, every employer out there has to follow the law. But the law is very narrow as far as what we can get, what we can ask, and what we can do. If we don't follow those laws, and if we were knowingly hiring undocumented workers or illegals, you can get a fine of up to $27,000 per employee.
For Representative Mickelsen, her biggest worry isn't necessarily her family business,
Double check.
but the chilling effect this had on her ability to do her other job, like when a similar immigration bill came back this session. When this came around for you to stand up and speak your mind on a topic like this, did that change?
This year, I didn't stand up and talk about it.
Why not?
I felt like that I didn't need to make myself and my family and our businesses a bigger target than it needed to be. And so I simply stayed quiet on the issue.
So you've had to change the way you do things?
I did have to change the way I did things, and I had a lot of sleepless nights where I said to myself, if I can't be effective anymore, then maybe it is time, then maybe I need to not be here. I need to do something differently. Or my choice was, I'm going to have to stand up and find my voice again. And so I finally decided that I'm going to do the best I can do while I'm here. I represent my community, I represent my constituents, I represent the people of Idaho. And if we lose good statesmen in this body, then where will we be?
Is this a bigger problem in this building or in this realm of politics where people feel like they can't say something because they'll get a target on their backs?
I think you're seeing more and more of that, especially in the last couple of years with the rise of social media and confrontational politics. You see this situation where people really think about whether or not they're ever going to make a public statement. Part of the problem with these extremist groups is they've come in, a lot of them have come in from another state, and we welcome out-of-staters to come in and move into Idaho, but to come in and then tell us that they know the Idaho way. The Idaho way is when we have a problem, we roll up our sleeves and we work together and we help our neighbors, or we have differences, but we sit at the table and hammer through what's the best solution for Idaho. But I think until some of us start standing up and saying this is enough. If you want to have a conversation, that's great. Let's not be an anarchist or an arsonist. Let's be an architect. Let's find a good future for Idaho.
Well, according to Investigate West's story, after that January raid of Mickelsen Farms, one employee was arrested by ICE and sent to a detention center in Las Vegas. Both she and her family say they would never knowingly employ an undocumented worker, and they follow all federal and state laws to be in compliance. By the way, Mickelsen did vote in favor of that immigration bill last session, despite her debate. And this ICE episode hasn't stopped her from speaking out last month against a bill requiring all employers in Idaho to use E-Verify, a federal program to prove workers are authorized to work here, mostly over the cost of enforcing it. That's why she wanted to see it not go anywhere. Well, she told us instead of getting tied up in all this national stuff colleagues seem to be using for campaign purposes lately, she'd rather focus on issues that matter to Idahoans. Less headline stuff like lower utility bills and water rights for future generations. As for Ryan Spoon, the vice chair of the Ada County GOP, who's made no secret of wanting to make Idaho unbearable for anyone who doesn't align with his politics, even though he only moved here 6 years ago. He refused to speak with us about the story. Actually, let me read for you what he did say. He said, the details of this story have already been reported by several reputable news or sources. You're welcome to republish that information from those stories in the hopes of someday becoming a reputable news outlet. Okay.